Chapter 12, Individuals and Families of Latin American and Latino Descent. So the terms Latina, Latino, and Hispanic are all grounded in the history of Latin America. Hispanic is derived from the Spanish word hispano, which is derived from Hispaniola, where Christopher Columbus first made landfall in the Western Hemisphere, so that's present-day Dominican Republic. Something to keep in mind is that some may view Hispanic as offensive, and this is because it references Latin America's colonial period and European heritage that took place from 1492 through the early 1900s. So Latina, Latino is the more appropriate term because it honors indigenous heritage of Spanish-speaking individuals with Latin American ancestry. But once again, just like with every other chapter we've talked about, every other group, it's best to ask your client what they prefer to be referred to as, or just pick up on their language, the language that they're using in the counseling session. So be mindful. So in the United States, Latinos and Latinas currently account for over 17.4% of the U.S. population. So that's about 55.4 million individuals. Latinos living in the U.S. come from 20 different countries, and there's vast variation in food, Spanish dialects, indigenous tongues, folk tales, burial rituals, dances, religious nuances, educational experiences, immigration statuses, career opportunities, and economic realities. So these are all things to keep in mind, those within group differences, right, that we've already talked about before. Other than traditional use of Spanish language, the affiliation with the Catholic Church and collectivist values are some of the within group similarities that you will see typically, but once again, don't generalize. Latinos share demographic realities that may stand as obstacles to political, social, and educational and emotional stability. So fewer have high school diplomas or four-year college degrees compared to non-Latino whites. Fewer earn more than $50,000 a year compared to whites, African Americans, and Asian Americans. And the median age of Latinos in the United States is 28 years old compared to 42 years old for white individuals, 33 years old for Black individuals, and 36 years old for Asian Americans. So Latinos with Mexican heritage, so that would be those born in Mexico or to Mexican parents, make up 64.1% or 34.6 million individuals within the United States. The U.S. immigration debate has focused on Mexicans due to the large concentration along border states. 40% of Mexicans, or roughly 15 million, living in the United States are not native born, so something to keep in mind. Some individuals assume that non-native U.S. residents are in this country illegally, and this tends to lead to racism and stereotypes as well. Issues of discrimination and limited socioeconomic advancement are compounded by large high school dropout rates and low four-year college completion rates, which we just referenced. Despite these barriers, many Mexicans and those of Mexican heritage have managed to influence society. They've ascended to governorships and influenced a lot of the performing and visual arts that we have. Puerto Ricans, this would be the second largest group of Latinos in the United States, and they make up roughly 9.5% of the U.S. Latino population, so that's 5.12 million individuals. They tend to live in and around metropolitan centers in the northeastern states, and Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, so all Puerto Ricans born in Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens. Experienced drops in median household income since 2000, but they've increased the rate at which they are finishing high school, so we see some trends going on there. They're more likely to have health insurance, but they're less likely to own a home when compared to Cubans and Mexicans living in the United States. Cubans are the third largest U.S. Latino population living in the United States. They account for about 3.7% or 1.98 million individuals in the United States. Cubans are more concentrated in South Florida and New York City. Most Cuban immigrants come to the United States for political reasons, and most immigrated within the last 50 years. And part of this is because of the rise of Fidel Castro's communist regime in 1959, The earliest Cuban immigrants from that post-communist wave of immigration were well educated, economically stable, and they also lost many of their possessions to the Castro government. Cubans living in the United States have made large strides in political circles, educational attainment, and economic success. So they're the highest rate of high school and college graduation within the Latino community. They have higher mean earnings than all other U.S. Latinos, and they've held 5 congressional seats and 3 Senate seats in the 114th U.S. Congress. However, U.S. Cubans may still experience economic hardship, acculturative stress, and educational barriers, so something to keep in mind as well. The remaining U.S. Latino and Latina population comes from the Dominican Republic, Central American countries, not including Mexico, and South America. Dominicans, Colombians, and Guatemalans make up a large percentage of the other U.S. Latinos, with at least 500,000 individuals from each group residing within the United States. So currently over 1.97 million Salvadorians reside in the U.S., and there's a similar number, similar to the number of Cuban Americans, Immigration patterns, they're more difficult to characterize than other groups, and this is because there are many reasons for leaving native lands. So for instance, political persecution, economic hardship, and then educational barriers may be reasons for moving to the United States. Also, it might be difficult to make generalizations because of the inherent nature of this group's vast differences concerning education, unemployment, public assistance, and mean earnings. Latin American and Latino culture and values. So Somos immigrants means we are immigrants. And this is an attribute that binds most U.S. Latinos. This identification as being non-native U.S.-born residents or being descendants of immigrants. Cubans and Mexicans have bonded together to promote public policy initiatives, and hardships suffered during immigration can bring various U.S. Latinos together. So recently, Latino immigration has started to decline, we've seen. This is due to anti-immigration policies and the economic recession of 2008. But this is kind of dated, like your book's a little bit dated, so I'd be interested to know what's going on now. When it comes to language, for most U.S. Latinos, there's at least a familiarity with Spanish, but it's going to depend on the generational status. The use of and familiarity of Spanish has helped promote a sense of understanding and community among U.S. Latinos from different countries of origin. When it comes to religion and spirituality, the vast majority of U.S. Latinos are Christian, 89.9%, and most identify as being Roman Catholic, so 67.6%. This affiliation with Catholicism is related to the colonization of Latin American countries by Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors. U.S. Latinos are more likely to turn to a priest, a minister, or a curandero, which is a healing man, than a mental health expert. So that's something to really keep in mind. We've kind of touched on with other groups as well. If your clients come in to see you, then things have probably gotten really, really bad because they may have already gone through different avenues that they feel more comfortable with. So they're kind of coming to you in a crisis, possibly. Another thing to keep in mind is that it may be beneficial to include these individuals who are important in their life in their treatment planning. So maybe encouraging them to also work with their priest alongside their counselor, whatever they feel would be most helpful for themselves, and something that maybe you've noticed that you think might be helpful for them given the things that they've talked about in the past, kind of exploring that stuff, right? Resiliency. So this is a personality trait, and it's one of the ways that Latinos manage to cope with common and extraordinary stressors. So things like learning a new city, missing their family and friends from home, dealing with racism and discrimination. All of this can kind of build on resiliency to help with coping with stress, right? So this concept of resiliency is so powerful in Latino cultures that it can help mitigate stressors of acculturative stress and immigration policies. So this could lead to lower anxiety levels and improved cardiovascular health, along with a plethora of other benefits that resiliency gives us. So something to keep in mind is resiliency when working with Latinos. So once again, you can see that this book and working with different groups, we're really harping on this idea of positive, moving past baseline and helping someone flourish, right? Gender roles. So machismo represents a strong, omnipotent man who takes care of his family by providing food and shelter. And Marianismo requires a woman to be pure, make sacrifices for her husband's and children's benefit, not engage in premarital sex, and be a nurturing female role model for her daughter. So you can think of the ultimate role model here as being the Virgin Mary. But something to keep in mind, depending on the generation of your client, is that second generation and beyond, we see clients tend to start questioning the merit and practice of traditional roles as they become more acculturated into the United States. When working with U.S. Latino clients and families, counselors should assess the importance and observance of traditional gender roles, just like we are assessing the importance of everything else. So just kind of exploring that once again with your clients. Families. So immediate and extended family is very important among U.S. Latinos. We have familismo, and this signifies an individual's consideration of their parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and even close friends of the family, and religious godparents when making decisions. So that's something else you can kind of explore, maybe working that into your treatment as well. Counselors should gauge how each family member views and defines immediate and extended family units. And younger U.S. Latinos and Latinas may resent the notion of sacrificing their own interests for the good of the family. So it's something else to explore. See if there are any conflicts due to generational differences. That might be something that comes up within the family that's causing more stress. So where does your client fit in all of that, right? Interpersonal relationships. So most U.S. Latinos and Latinas hold interpersonal relationships with family and friends in very high regard. So personalismo means warmth, affection, concern about others, and positive regard for those close to an individual. So these feelings are expected to be reciprocated. And that you might even see that in kind of a lack of personal space with some clients. So keeping that in mind as well and exploring it, and that might affect the counseling relationship, and it might affect your client's life, their interpersonal relationships with those who are of different subgroups than they are. So maybe there's a little bit of miscommunication, right? Some interpersonal issues due to that miscommunication and difference in values and culture, something to explore. Confianza is translated into trust and confidence, and it's the closest counterpart to rapport in the counseling relationship. So this must be earned and maintained typically. So something else to kind of keep in mind with your clients. Individual differences and identities. So the core cultural values that shape U.S. Latinos' experiences are mediated by their immigration status, their generational status, and their socioeconomic status. So immigration status is crucial to understanding options, barriers, and opportunities that your client might be facing. Latinos with legal residency or U.S. citizenship typically have access to economic, educational, and physical wellness resources that undocumented U.S. Latinos do not. So counselors working with any undocumented clients should pay particular attention to how this may be influencing their day-to-day life. You can't be afraid to discuss any anxiety, doubt, or frustration that might be associated with their undocumented status, and also check for any psychosomatic physical health concerns that your client may be having. When it comes to language, another thing to keep in mind is that some people define first-generation U.S. immigrants as those who were born in a different country and immigrated to the U.S., so their children would be considered second-generation immigrants. However, others consider first-generation immigrants to be those who were born in the United States and born of immigrants. So this can get kind of complicated, just like many other things can be when it comes to language. So just picking up on your client's language, asking them if you have any questions or if you're confused when it comes to something like that, because it might get kind of complicated if you have multiple clients of Latino or Latina descent, and trying to kind of pick up on that. So just ask. So it's really important to understand their generational status, because this is going to have a huge impact on their experiences and their perspectives. So it is something that's important to kind of keep in mind and to ask about. Counselors need to consider different issues that may be facing different generations, and kind of exploring that with your client, because there may be some like kind of butting of heads between generations, right? Socioeconomic status. So this would also be social class. This is a combination of income, employment status, educational attainment, experiences with poverty, accumulated wealth, life expectancy, and even the number of individuals living within a household. So 24.6% of Latinos live at or below the poverty line, and this is compared to 11% of whites. 28.6% of Latinos in the United States lack health insurance, and this is compared to 10.3% of whites. So socioeconomic status of undocumented workers is of particular concern, because that's just a compounding stressor, and with possible deportation coupled with losing one's job, all of that just causes more and more stress, and it's all compounding on itself. Another thing to keep in mind is that undocumented workers are typically paid less than documented workers for doing the same types of jobs. They also have less access to collective bargaining opportunities, and they have less overall job security. So that's even more stress that your client might be experiencing. Mental health issues of individuals of Latin American and Latino descent. So systems play roles in the experiences of U.S. Latinos on personal, family, and community levels. So lots of systemic stuff going on here. We see that about 32% of U.S. Latinos and Latinas say that they speak English less than very well. Communication barriers may contribute to or complicate any mental health concerns for your U.S. Latino clients. This affects communication with coworkers, school peers, members of the justice system, their children's teachers, understanding any traffic signs and laws, and the list goes on and on and on, and that's just very stressful for your client. This may also lead to them experiencing barriers and discrimination in the workforce and in school settings, and that's definitely going to adversely affect their mental health. So things that you might not have thought about is that the educational system is not as equally available or helpful to Latina students. So lower levels of education affect self-efficacy levels, and this contributes to higher poverty and limited earnings. So once again, you kind of have this cycle going on. It's kind of compounding. They're less likely to be enrolled in preschool. They're less likely to graduate from high school by 19, and they're less likely to enter and complete college. First-generation parents tend to be less familiar with navigating the school system. Any extracurricular activities, tutoring, free reduced fee lunches, all of this stuff is less available because they're less likely to know about it or to seek it or to advocate for it for their children. Also, they're less likely to participate in any of these resources because their parents may have multiple jobs, so they might not be around to bring them to after school care, extracurricular, or tutoring or that kind of thing. And they might also feel out of place because of that language barrier, because of generational status. All of these things might make them feel like they don't really belong, so they're less likely to seek out these services as well. Acculturative stress, so this refers to internal psychological reaction to balancing strains of learning about a new culture while longing for familiarity of one's previous surroundings. So acculturative stress affects first-generation U.S. Latinos as well as future generations. Continued distance from family and residing in a community with few Latinos exponentially decreases the mental health of Latino immigrants. So something else to keep in mind, kind of looking at your client's environment. Do they have anyone that looks like them around them? Do they have anyone that speaks their language around them? That kind of thing. Um, when it comes to grief and loss, so U.S. Latinos may experience grief and loss associated with leaving loved ones behind and also sacrificing cultural traits for those of the host culture. So this can lead to substance use, suicidal ideation, domestic violence, and even heart disease. First generation may also feel that they are losing their children and grandchildren to the United States society, which can also lead to generational conflicts. So that kind of butting heads again. So it's important that we encourage our clients to talk about family members, friends, and social networks that maybe they left behind, as well as current experiences and reactions while establishing new roots in the United States. Kind of exploring all of that. Experiences with discrimination. So this is often correlated with high levels of stress and depression and low self-confidence and self-efficacy, and then overall limited quality of life. So discrimination on college campuses contributed to high levels of stress, students' increased concerns about academic performance and capabilities, and depressive symptoms. And researchers have found a multifaceted impact of discrimination on mental and physical health. So discrimination is associated with significantly higher levels of diabetes-related stress and depressive symptoms for Latinos. And adolescents, we see that discrimination is related to stress that's affected by immigration status of their parents. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then U.S. Latinos can experience a variety of mental, physical, and social problems such as domestic violence, substance use, and depression, like we talked about earlier, and factors that may contribute to fear, anxiety, helplessness, hopelessness, or anger include divorce, unemployment, teenage pregnancy, physical and sexual abuse, academic struggles, and homelessness. Okay, so guidelines for counseling clients of Latin American and Latino descent. And once again, I know this is really repetitive because we've talked about it with every other group, but it's kind of really trying to pound this into your brain. So counseling needs, strengths, goals, and objectives vary according to age, immigration status, country of origin, and where they live in the United States. Economic and socioeconomic status, language preference, and assimilation may affect it as well. So all of these are things to keep in mind. Counseling theories and techniques that are effective with Latino clients include cognitive behavioral therapy, person-centered, psychodynamic, and solution-focused counseling approaches. And the literature seems to lend a little more support for using CBT and more directive approaches. So that's something to keep in mind. So 2 key factors that must be taken into account when working with U.S. Latino children is age. So counselors must ensure that interventions are developmentally appropriate, obviously. And then birthplace. So compared to those born in the United States, children who were born in native countries and immigrated to the United States are more likely to experience academic difficulty. They're less likely to attain cognitive fluency in Spanish or English, and they're more likely to face greater risk for acculturative stress. Counselors can use individual, group, and family counseling interventions, and they should keep in mind the influence of the family and the school systems on their clients, when you're working with children and adolescents. Group interventions. This is a unique opportunity to share similar feelings and experiences with peers, and also enhance feelings of universality and cohesion, so that family environment that's very valued within this culture. Counselors working with U.S. Latino and Latina children should be aware of the child's knowledge of and identification with their heritage, their immediate and extended family members, and where important family members may live, the fluency in English and Spanish and preferred language, upbringing regarding roles of gender socialization, reactions to experiences with racism and discrimination, and their self-concept and self-efficacy as it relates to their academic performance. So some more information. This is about working with adolescents. So counselors should pay close attention to academic experiences of adolescents. So typical developmental adolescent experiences are just exacerbated here by their English proficiency, their need to balance home and social or in school cultures, and their limited parental involvement in school and social interests. So counselors must assess the type and quality of relationships that adolescents have with their parents and other family members, and how that's going to affect other systems that they're working within. Counselors working with U.S. Latino and Latina adolescents should also be aware of their adolescents' difficulty reconciling bicultural status, any feelings that they have towards adhering to gender-related expectations in the face of American values, their sexual orientation development, limited exposure to culturally related extracurricular school activities and sports, any potential substance use that they're using as a coping mechanism for any stress that they may have, and their level of experience and exposure to various career opportunities. Individual interventions. This can be an effective way to help adolescents deal with pressures associated with biculturalism, so like really exploring that stuff at an individual level. And then group interventions can be an effective way to help them deal with gender socialization struggles. So recently, a concept called caballerismo, which means being a gentleman, promotes a more pro-social type of masculinity for adolescent Latinos, like as opposed to machismo that we talked about earlier. Including immediate and extended family members when counseling adolescents can be tricky, but brief strategic family therapy has been shown to be effective for helping adolescents with substance use and behavioral problems in particular. Okay, so how about counseling adults? So with adults, it's important to consider the impact of immigration status and practice of cultural and religious customs. First-generation immigrants may experience constant stress over being undocumented, that status, over sense of pride for achieving citizenship, or guilt for having to sacrifice their affiliation with their country of origin. The amount of time an adult has lived in the United States can also influence how much they adhere to Latino norms, customs, traditions, and religious practices. So counselors should assess if and how adult clients presenting problems are associated with their immigration and a longing for cultural connections. Counselors working with the U.S. Latino and Latina adults should also be aware of adults who struggle with caring for their elderly parents within a society that considers this to be not as respectful of the elderly as a Latino culture. Also be aware of those who experience discrimination in the workplace or who are underemployed. This might be a result of their educational attainment or their immigration status, so kind of exploring that as well. Be aware of those who find it difficult to connect with their children because of those differences between school culture and home culture and even generation. Those who feel powerless because they must depend on their children to serve as translators in the child's English fluency, and the child's English fluency may be greater than their own, so kind of battling those feelings. And then those who feel they need to send remittances to family members, friends, or creditors in their native countries, while also struggling to reach economic stability in the United States. Okay, so a systems approach, which I kind of alluded to earlier because there's lots of systems going on here, right? This can be really important for working with U.S. Latino adults. Individual interventions should also be considered because of different culturally related factors that may be impacting the presenting issue, so exploring all of that. Group counseling has benefits of cohesion and universality. However, it's important to be aware of clients' countries of origin and generational status rather than simply lumping U.S. Latino clients together in a group. So, right, once again, we have those within group differences as well. So, trying to explore that, but we already know it's very difficult to make a group anyways, finding clients, that kind of thing. So this may be a little bit difficult. Counselors should also ask how clients would feel about involving immediate and extended family members within therapy. And counselors must keep in mind any potential resistance to seeking mental health from someone other than a fellow family member or clergy member. And then culture-centered genograms could also be helpful to enhance family therapy objectives, exercises, and goals. So this can all be some things that you can bring into your therapy with these clients. And that is it for this chapter.